Now, at this time, the chief of the German General Staff, the one really calling the shots in military matters, was Helmut von Moltke. Okay, Moltke, who was a fairly skilled strategist and tactician as far as things go, nonetheless made a series of strategic blunders at the beginning of the war that cost the Germans dearly in the long run. For one, he weakened the sort of initial thrust of the Schlieffenplan by diverting troops to the territory of Alsace-Lorraine and to eastern Prussia. Okay, having sort of recently won Alsace-Lorraine from France a few decades earlier, it was thought that this would be the main sort of point of attack, point of counterattack, I should say, that the French were going to take. This, however, was misguided. The Germans also faced much stiffer resistance than they had anticipated. They had not expected to have to fight the British expeditionary force, which had been sent in to try to shore up French fortifications and French defenses in light of Germany's invasion of Belgium. So the German advance was halted at the First Battle of the Marne, which took place at the beginning of September 1914, and again at the Battle of Aisne in mid-September. By December of 1914, the front had basically stagnated, okay? And all parties started digging. They literally dug in their heels, they dug into their positions, and what resulted was a 400-mile-long system of trenches basically running all the way from the Swiss border in the east to the North Sea, in the south, excuse me, to the North Sea. This was not at all the decisive victory or the quick war, or indeed the offensive war that Germany had intended to wage. Now, while this is going on in France, Russia mobilized her troops much more quickly than had been anticipated and launched an invasion of East Prussia. Okay? Fatefully, one of the German generals, a gentleman by the name of Prittwitz, though that's not terribly important, ordered a retreat to the Vistula on the 20th of August, okay? And as a result of this, Moltke, okay, the chief of the German General Staff, replaced Prittwitz, who he took to be kind of a coward and to have weakened Germany's position in the east, and replaced him with a gentleman by the name of Paul von Hindenburg. So he is a Prussian. He had experience fighting in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. He had been promoted to the rank of general in 1878. He had been promoted to the rank of general in 1905. He had actually retired from active military service by the outbreak of the war. Now, more campaigns through 1915 ended up allowing the Germans to penetrate pretty deep into Russian territory, okay? Hindenburg had been promoted to field marshal, and he was placed in command of the whole Eastern Front, and he ended up being quite successful, at least in the early stages. The Germans drove into Poland, as far north as the northeast as the Baltic states. They captured Warsaw in 1915. Ironically, the entire purpose of the Schlieffen Plan had been to sort of establish a war of movement in the West, okay, to sort of quickly and decisively launch a campaign that would knock out France so that the Germans would be able to reinforce their positions and fight a war of attrition on the Eastern Front. Now, ironically, exactly the opposite is what happened. The Germans get bogged down in the West, in France, whereas in the East, they end up fighting quite a sort of fast-paced and mobile war against the Russians. Now, of course, the war, as it went on, ended up being the most destructive conflict in all of human history up until that point. The amount of degradation, both of human lives, environmental degradation, economic degradation, that took place over the course of 4.5 years is really kind of boggles the mind. And over this period of time, more and more reports coming from the front of the dire conditions, the lack of food, the lack of sanitation, the embitterment and misery that was associated with being at the front, stuck in the trenches, and essentially told to basically go on repeated suicide missions, which is really what trench warfare came down to, right? Every once in a while, the generals would call for a massive push forward, where everyone in the trenches would have to hop out and just rush as fast as they could at the enemy lines while they're being mowed down by the thousands by machine gun fire and by explosives. This was demoralizing in sort of every way, and it's the scars that the veterans of this conflict bring with them into the Weimar Republic that is established after the war, and into the Third Reich, and even beyond, that really need to inform how we think about why people acted the way they did, why they made the decisions that they did. Now, on the home front, that is really where the war, in some ways, is decided, right? So this is the first, what is called total war. That is to say, this is the first time that the belligerents in a conflict actively mobilize the entire sort of force of society towards the war effort. Okay, banks and export industries were entirely sort of put towards the needs of winning the war, the needs of the army. This, of course, disrupts many industries. In addition to that, the Allied blockade of Germany. Remember, Britain unquestionably controls the seas at this point, and Germany is not self-sufficient despite its advances in, agricultural technologies, chemical fertilizer, and these things. It is not self-sufficient when it comes to its food needs. Okay. This makes it very difficult for Germany to import not only foods but other raw materials. This leads to the necessity of the German government intervening increasingly in economic matters on the German home front, creating a precedent that ends up getting carried forward past the war. Okay, so for example, in 1915, the establishment of the Raw Materials Department, the Kriegsrohstoffabteilung, basically ensures the acquisition, storage, and distribution of materials that are vital to the war effort. Also in 1915 is the beginning of bread rationing. Okay, so the government basically issues allotments of how much bread individuals can buy.